Hello. Happy Wednesday. Right? Wednesday? That's now, right? Wednesday is now? Yeah, Wednesday is now. February 8th. Bonkers. I mean, not really that bonkers. It is Wednesday. Benedict is not very patiently. Sharkies! Benedict is not very patiently waiting for rice cake snacks. Wednesday? I feel like Wednesday is less um, less egregious than February, though, because you do kind of say Wednesday. You just say it quickly. Like you can hear most of the sounds at least. Wednesday. It kind of sometimes sounds like Wednesday, like WEND. It's almost like you're adding in a letter, or at least moving them out of order. But February. It's just one R just gets dropped entirely. February. Short for Odin's/Woden's Day. Good old Woden. Fun fact: February is short for Febreze. You wary. So we had our open house on the weekend. A couple of hours each on Saturday and Sunday. We had 8 groups come through on Saturday and 7 on Sunday. So it was pretty busy. Wednesday. 13. Yeah. 13 over like 4 hours. Um, yeah, and then we had another booked showing today, and we had a few booked showings last week. And then we're going to have another open house this coming weekend, I think just on the Saturday, though. So, busy as far as house stuff goes. Yeah. We went and visited some friends while that was happening, so we were out of the way, of course. So that's how our weekend went. I've been playing a little bit of this very sort of pixel art game called Heroes Hour that I got for free at some point. Um, which is kind of fun. It's sort of a, what do they call it? Like 4X game? Like exploration, expansion. I don't remember what all the X's are. Februarius. The month of purgings. Februarius. I mean, um, I think a lot of the names of months go back to around that time and place. Because there was also a thing where, like, October is the 10th month. And you'd think, shouldn't shouldn't that be the 8th month? And I guess at some point it was the 8th month, but then someone wanted some extra names thrown in on months, so they like added 2 months before then for, hubris reasons or whatever, something like that. Um, yeah. All cool emperors got months. Yeah, that sounds right. Look at that guy. Look at that pup. You want to dance? Dance, dance, dance? Come. Yeah, that kind of reminds me. It's like I watch a fair amount of anime, and sometimes, frequently, there's high school kids, whatever, in anime. And what I've gathered from anime is that the Japanese school year starts in spring, and then they take a break for like summer break, and then they resume their school year um, after summer break is over and go through to the end of the year, like the end of the like it ends in winter, which honestly makes more sense to me than the school year starting in fall and then having a winter break and then resuming after winter break and continuing through to you know June or wherever it ends. So the Japanese school year makes a little more sense to me. Because it was always like, also like, then you end up in like a year where, like, in the school year where like some kids are kind of like older or younger than others because of the weird break, because the school year starts halfway through the actual year. I don't know. Not that that would really actually change things starting at the beginning of the year, but I feel like it would make more sense, right? Like, everyone would begin the school year at around the same age and end the school year around the same age, right? Theoretically? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But then again, ages in school, jumping to a completely different topic, are also very weird because in that, like, especially in like elementary school, like, you know, throughout the course of 1 year's age, children change so drastically, right? Develop so much um, that having all these kids that are, in the same year together is very odd. And depending on like whether your birthday is like towards the end of the school year or the beginning or whatever, you've got kind of like a big advantage or disadvantage in how you will perform in that school year and in subsequent school years. Anyways, I'm off topic. Sort of, I guess. I don't know. On the other hand, I guess I kind of am making up the topics. But that's not what this stream's about. I think our school year starts in fall because the big break was when all the child laborers had to take a few months to harvest on their parents' farms. Looking it up, you were wrong. January and February were the last months added in the old Roman calendar. Before that, it was just considered a monthless time. In the game Exalted, which I've talked about before, they have like, I think it's like a 1 week period at the end of each year that is like outside of time. That's just basically, I think people mostly just party through it, but it's also like weird stuff happens in that period of time, and like the borders with the Feywild maybe are like broken, and you might end up cursed accidentally, and there's certain magics that only work during that time, and it's an interesting little thing that probably won't come up in a lot of games. Hmm. Don't they look cozy? Usually what happens anyways. Yeah, the whole like, I don't know, asking what people have been up to during the winter just feels rude. Don't ask me that. Nothing. Obviously, nothing is different since the last time we spoke. I felt like it was like that through a lot of COVID as well. Through COVID times, it was like, what's new? Nothing? I've been at home. What about you? Ah, yes, I also have been at home. Julian calendar to the Gregorian. Hmm. So, we're on to a new part in in Castle of Wizardry, and I have to say, we don't really have any spaces on this bingo sheet left that have anything to do with Sinedra. There are characters that we last saw, you know, at the Isle of the Winds that are on here, right? Dernick, Taiba, Relg, Mandarellen. But are we going away from Silk and Garion? Because that could make getting a bingo a little trickier than we would have thought. When to remove 2 weeks. Need to move the camera just a little this way. There we go. Makes it easier. Ugh, daylight savings. I really would like to get rid of that. It's so unnecessary and in some cases just dangerous. You think he's like looking lovingly over here, but he's really just keeping an eye on the snacks. He's like, I'm gonna cozy in, but at some point he's gonna reach for that snack bowl, and I gotta be ready. Gotta back up slightly so you can see him easier. He's looking lovingly, just not necessarily at me. He loves snack. So yeah. the previous chapter, our Garion learned how to shape change. Which basically is picture said the animal you want to change into, and then just melt into that picture. Which means you got to make sure that you picture it right. Because you don't say, like, I want to change into an octopus and then do that. You have to picture an octopus and you have to, like, fully imagine what an octopus is, and then you need to fit yourself into that picture. So you don't, the definition comes from you. Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat. I like the later days. What is this? The Secret World of Alex Mack? That show that everybody knows and remembers very well. You You might be able to, but then the problem would be that you would be a puddle. Because the thing is, so he pictured a wolf and then he fit himself into the shape of a wolf, but then he was a wolf, right? He understood wolf mannerisms and kind of how to speak as a wolf, and he understood the nature of wolves better once he was in that form. So it seems to be like you picture the form, but then you take on the nature, which is a little odd. Um, so yeah, I don't know. Also, I mean, realistically, we don't know about taking non-organic forms, non-living forms. Maybe a puddle with sentient microbacteria. Uh, I watched I watched The Secret World of Alex Mack fairly regularly, but it was always, just on TV, which made it a lot harder to follow any stories on any show, right? Things weren't played in order very frequently. What I remember about The Secret World of Alex Mack is that said title character got splashed with toxic waste or radioactive waste or something from a car crash or truck crash, very similar to like Daredevil. But then that allowed Alex Mack to melt into a puddle of mercury and also have telekinetic powers and maybe also telepathic powers. I'm pretty sure telekinetic powers, and I'm less certain about the telepathic powers. And that's basically what I remember about it. I don't really remember the plot. Maybe there was like an evil corporation that was after Alex Mack, because of the accident and subsequent power gaining. I was watching it at my grandma's apartment once, and my grandma saw the like melting into mercury thing and like got upset, like, oh, this is awful. And I was like, no, it's okay, she's still like, it's just a power thing, she can change back, she didn't die. Yeah. Oh, sleepy. Weirded out by your Alf t-shirt. I don't think there's anybody that doesn't think Alf was a weird character. Furry alien dude who ate cats. So yeah, Garion learned to transform into a wolf. And, theoretically other forms, but the wolf's the only one he's got any practice with at this point. And then he also learned that his ultimate grandmother is just kind of hanging around. Like, she can just show up. Currently has the talking elf sitting on his nightstand. Wow. They also discussed sort of the physics a little bit of what happens to your stuff when you transform, and the answer to that was it's just kind of there, but it's not there. It was very vague, very like, Doctor Who explanation about what time is. And I mean, the really sort of weirdest part of that was that this just includes the Orb of Aldor, which is this super important artifact. Goes into your inventory. It goes into like item box space. But like the thing is, it just sort of goes out there. But they also said that when you transform, that transformation is absolute. It's like a complete transformation. You're not like human Garion as a wolf. You are Garion the wolf, which implies to me that if something horrible happened and Garion transformed into wolf and then died, then I don't know if it would be possible to get the orb back. Unless somebody else maybe then transformed the body back into a human, then maybe all the stuff would come back with it. Maybe that would be how you would deal with that problem. Or, yeah. Just don't think about it. Yeah. Going back to Exalted again. In Exalted, you're playing this character that's very, very, very powerful. You're like sort of a super demigod. And there are some of the sort of spell type things called charms in that world that you can do that allow you to send some of your items away. I forget where they go. It's called like, it's a very generic term, like they go away or something like that, or they go elsewhere or something. But there was this comic in one of the books about this guy that figured out a way to break into the elsewhere space because he wanted to get at all the magic gear that was in there, all the orichalcum diclaves and mystical spheres and things like that. And so basically, yeah. But he like teleported himself into this elsewhere space and then was like, uh-oh, it's a static dimension, I can't move. And so the guy was just stuck in that space, surrounded by all these massive swords and things. So, Part 4, The Raven Queen. Interesting that we're on the second to last book, and every book has had multiple parts, and as far as I can remember, this is the first part that hasn't been the name of, Sendaria, or the Isle of the Winds, or, like, Arendia, or like Prolgu or Tolnedra, whatever, right? I think every other part was the name of a place. So something makes this at least a little unique. Yeah. We are starting with... Ooh, wrong way. A map that I believe we've seen before. I don't know if we've definitely seen these various places. I don't know whether or not we've seen this specific map. Also, something about this map makes that forest in Erendia looks very square. And I guess I don't remember seeing Tolnadra actually is that... What is that? Oh, that's the forest of Vorju. Alright. I thought maybe it was a city or something. So yeah, we've definitely seen all of these places before, but I don't know if we've seen this exact cutout of the map before. Do you have the same map, or do you have the Chris whatever, the other person's version of it? Because this is, once again, the Shelley Shapiro, I think it says 83. Shelley Shapiro 83, which, if I remember correctly, matches up with, I guess this book was 84 publication, so that, lines up more or less, right? Same map. I'm just flipping back and forth from our big map, and I don't think that this is just a cutout of that map. I think this is... Yeah, there are little bits on this that are different than on the big map. Lines that are in slightly different places. So it's not just a cutout, it is a redrawn section. Yeah. So, chapter 22. In my copy is on page 197. The Drasnia section was very small. The Drasnia part. Yeah, I guess so. In my copy, it went from page 159 through to 193. So, like, less than 40 pages. I mean, they're bigger pages. Okay, so everybody ready to get on to this next part? I'm guessing I'm going to be doing a lot more of Sinedra's voice in this part. Well, definitely than the previous part, because she wasn't in that. But, yeah. I wonder, I suspect that this part of the book might have more voices in general than the previous one. We got sort of... The previous part was all of, like... What? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5... Like 5 characters? 6, maybe? I guess Captain Greldick had a small part. So like 6 characters in the previous part, right? Silk, Belgarath, Garion, Vordu, or Vordai. Vordai. Weird, there's a Vordu and a Vordai. Vordai, Greldick, and Queen Poren. That's pretty much all of the speaking parts that came up, I think. Oh, and Poledra, yeah, right, of course, in the final chapter. So 7. All right. Well, here we go. The Princess Sinedra was in a thoughtful, even pensive mood. Much as she had enjoyed the turmoil her periodic outbursts of temper had caused, she rather regretfully concluded that it was probably time to put them aside and make peace with Garion. Oof. That's quite the way to start this. Knowing what we know. They were going to be married, after all, and there was no real point in upsetting him any more than absolutely necessary. Her tantrums had established the fact that, although he might outrank her, she would not enter the marriage as his inferior, and that was really all she had wanted anyway. On the whole, the prospect of being married to Garion was not nearly as unpleasant as she pretended. She did love him, after all, and now that he understood exactly how things were going to stand between them, everything was likely to be quite satisfactory. She decided to find him that very day and make peace with him. The largest part of her attention that spring morning had been taken up by a book on protocol and a chart that she was carefully drawing up. Oh boy. Yeah. Yup. Buckle up, folks. A chart she was carefully drawing up. As Imperial Princess of Tolnedra and Queen of Riva, she would, of course, absolutely outrank every Grand Duchess of every house in the Empire. She was also fairly sure that she outranked Queen Islena of Cherek and Queen Silar of Algaria. Maya Serana's status as co-ruler of Arendia raised some problems, however. It was entirely possible that she and Maya Serana, it's Mayasserana, Maya Serana. It was entirely possible that she and Maya Serana were equals. Sinedra made a note on a scrap of parchment, reminding herself to have Ambassador Valgan direct an inquiry to the Chief of Protocol in Tolhoneth concerning the matter. She felt a nice little glow as she surveyed the chart. With the exception of Lady Polgara and the motherly little Queen Layla of Sendaria, to whom everyone deferred because she was such a dear, Sinedra concluded that she would in fact outrank, or at least equal, every noble lady in the West. I love that, according to her own official chart, she still doesn't outrank Polgara, because obviously, but also she doesn't outrank Queen Layla of Sendaria, for the sole reason that she's such a dear. Like, she's not sure about Maya Serana, because Maya Serana is also a, co-ruler. But I feel like she's kind of forgetting Garion's Overlord of the West thing. Right? It's funny to see that coming from Sinedra, to whom rank is obviously so important. Like, I would not have expected to see Queen Layla categorized together with Lady Polgara in terms of rank. That's pretty great. All right. She would, in fact, outrank or at least equal every noble lady in the West. Suddenly, there was a shattering thunderclap, so violent that it shook the very walls of the citadel. Startled, Sinedra glanced at the window. It was a bright, sunny morning. How could there be thunder? Another rending crash ripped the silence, and there was a frightened babble in the halls. Impatiently, the princess picked up a small silver bell and rang for her maid. Oh no! Also, that juxtaposition, boom! Oh, it's sunny outside. Boom! People are scared outside. Dingle, dingle, ding. Maid. Go see what's happening, she instructed the girl, and returned to her study of the chart she had drawn. But there was another thunderous crash, and even more shouting and confusion in the corridor outside. It was impossible. How could she concentrate with all that noise going on? Irritably, she rose and went to the door. People were running, actually fleeing. Just down the hall, Queen Layla of Sendaria bolted from the door of Lady Polgara's private apartment, her eyes wide with terror, and her crown very nearly falling off. What is the matter, your majesty? Sinedra demanded of the little queen. It's Polgara, Queen Layla gasped, stumbling in her haste to escape. She's destroying everything in sight. Lady Polgara? Another deafening crash sent the little queen reeling, and she clung to Sinedra in terror. Please, Sinedra, find out what's wrong. Make her stop before she shakes down the entire fortress. Me? She'll listen to you. She loves you. Make her stop. Without pausing to consider the possible danger, Sinedra went quickly to Lady Polgara's door and glanced inside. The apartment was a total shambles. Furniture was overturned, wall hangings had been ripped down, the windows were shattered, and the air was full of smoke. Sinedra had thrown enough tantrums in her own life to appreciate artistry when she saw it. But the disaster inside Polgara's apartment was so absolute that it went beyond art into the realms of natural catastrophe. Lady Polgara herself stood, wild-eyed and disheveled, in the center of the room, cursing incoherently in a dozen languages at once. In one hand she held a crumpled sheet of parchment. Her other hand was raised like a claw before her, half clenched about an incandescent mass of blazing energy that she seemed to have summoned out of air itself, and which she now fed with her own fury. The princess stood in awe as Polgara began a fresh tirade. The dreadful cursing began in a low contralto and rose in an awful crescendo into the upper registers and beyond. As she reached the limits of her voice, she began slashing the air with the blazing mass in her hand, punctuating each curse with a crackling burst of raw energy that sizzled from between her fingers like a bolt of lightning to shatter whatever her eyes fell upon. With a series of vile oaths, she detonated 6 teacups in a row into shards. Then, quite methodically, she went back down the line, exploding the saucers upon which they had sat. Almost as an afterthought, she blew the table into splinters. Sinedra heard a strangled gasp directly behind her. King Anheg, the blood drained from his face, looked once through the door, then turned and ran. Lady Polgara, Sinedra remonstrated to the sorceress. trying not so much to reason with her as to minimize the destruction. Snack time. Yep. Polgara shattered 4 priceless vases standing on the mantelpiece with 4 precisely separate explosions. Outside the window, the bright spring morning vanished, as if the sun had suddenly been extinguished. There was a sullen rumble of thunder that Sinedra prayed devoutly was natural. "Whatever is the matter?" the princess asked, hoping to draw the enraged sorceress into explanation rather than more curses. It was the curses that had to be headed off. Polgara seemed to have a deep-seated need to emphasize her oaths with explosions. Polgara, however, did not reply. Instead, she merely threw the parchment at Sinedra, turned, and blew a marble statue into fine white gravel. Wild-eyed, she wheeled about, looking for something else to break. But there was very little left in the smoking room that she had not already reduced to rubble. "No!" Sinedra cried out sharply, as the raging woman's eyes fell on the exquisite crystal wren Garion had given her. The princess knew that Polgara valued the glass bird more than anything else she possessed, and she leaped forward to protect the delicate piece. "Get it!" Polgara snarled at her from between clenched teeth. "Take it out of my sight!" Her eyes burned with a terrible need to destroy something else. She spun and hurled the incandescent ball of fire she had wielded out through the shattered window. The explosion, when it burst in the suddenly murky air outside, was ghastly. With her fists clenched tightly at her sides, she raised her distorted face and began to curse again. From roiling black clouds that had suddenly appeared out of nowhere, shattering bolts of lightning began to rain down on the island. No longer satisfied with localized destruction, Polgara expanded her rage to rake the isle and the Sea of the Winds with sizzling fire and ear-splitting thunder. Then, with a dreadful intensity, she raised one fist and suddenly opened it. The downpour of rain she called was beyond belief. Her glittering eyes narrowed, and she raised her other fist. The rain instantly turned to hail, great, jagged chunks of ice that crashed and splintered against the rocks to fill the air with flying fragments and thick steam. Sinedra caught up the wren, stooped to grab the rumpled piece of parchment from the floor, and then she fled. King Anheg poked his frightened face from around a corner. "Can't you stop her?" he demanded in a shaking voice. "Nothing can stop her, Your Majesty." "Anheg, get in here!" Polgara's voice rang above the thunder and the crashing deluge of hail that shook the citadel. "Oh, Belar!" King Anheg muttered devoutly, casting his eyes skyward even as he hurried toward Polgara's door. "Get word to Val Alorn immediately," she commanded him. "My father, Silk, and Garion slipped out of the citadel last night. Get your fleet out and bring them back. I don't care if you have to take the world apart stone by stone. Find them and bring them back." "Polgara, the king of Cherek faltered. "Don't stand there gaping like an idiot. Move!" Carefully, almost with a studied calm, the Princess Sinedra handed the glass wren to her frightened maid. "Put this someplace safe," she said. Then she turned and went back to the center of the storm. "What was that you just said?" she asked Polgara in a level voice. I may need to reread this section in a moment. I'll finish it first, and then I think I might go back. "My idiot father, Garion, and that disgusting little thief," I guess it just says that disgusting thief. I threw in a little there because it's silk, "decided last night to go off on their own." Polgara replied in an... I did that wrong. She wasn't shouting here. Polgara replied in an icy voice that made even more terrible by the superhuman control that held it in. "They did what?" Sinedra asked flatly. "They left. They sneaked away during the night." "Then you must go after them." "I can't, Sinedra." Polgara spoke as if explaining something to a child. "Someone has to stay here. There are too many things here that could go wrong. He knows that. He did it deliberately. He's trapped me here." I guess that's why they snuck out without talking to Polgara, is Belgarath also felt that somebody had to stay at the Isle of the Winds, and obviously she wouldn't have allowed them to go. So they never really explained that, but I guess it's sort of a, they need somebody at their level left behind to control everything there, to keep all of the kings in reign and everything else. Did he... He's writing the letter. Belgarath said, "Don't drag it out too much. Nothing you say is going to make her happy about this, so stick to the point. Don't you think I ought to explain why we're doing this? She's read the codex. She'll know why without your explanation. I really ought to leave a note for Sinedra too. Polgara can tell her what she needs to know. We have things to do and we can't afford to spend the whole night on correspondence. Blah, blah, blah. Don't labor at it." I don't see anything here about it. And then Silk said he wanted to be outside of Polgara's range. See, I just thought, like, I throughout this, I've been kind of thinking, like, they didn't explain why the three of them snuck off on their own. Anyways, I need to go back just a little bit. I just need to reread this section here. So we're going to go back to Anheg getting summoned into the room. "Get word to Valalorn immediately. My father, Silk and Garion, slipped out of the Citadel last night. Get your fleet out and bring them back. I don't care if you have to take the world apart stone by stone. Find them and bring them back. Polgara, don't stand there gaping like an idiot. Move!" Let's see if I can do this. I may not be able to do this, but I'm going to try. Carefully, almost with a studied calm, the Princess Sinedra handed the glass wren to her frightened maid. "Put this someplace safe," she said. Then she turned and went back to the center of the storm. "What was that you just said?" she asked Polgara in a level voice. "My idiot father, Garion, and that disgusting thief decided last night to go off on their own," Polgara replied in a level voice. "They did what?" "I can't do it," Sinedra asked flatly. "They left. They sneaked away during the night." "Hi!" The way she went calm just very reminded me of Miss Piggy. I'm sorry for my horrible interpretation. Yeah. It was just the like, hear something very upsetting, go calm, ask for them to repeat themselves, then get upset. It's very Miss Piggy. So, then you must go after them. I can't, Sinedra. Someone has to stay here. There are too many things here that could go wrong. He knows that. He did it deliberately. He's trapped me here. Garion? No, you silly girl! My father! And Polgara began cursing again, each oath punctuated with a crash of thunder. Sinedra, however, scarcely heard her. She looked around. There was really nothing left to break in here. You'll excuse me, I hope, she said. Then she turned, went back to her own rooms, and began breaking everything she could lay her hands on, screeching all the while like a Kamar fishwife. Hiya! I feel like that second hiya was better. Their separate rages lasted for several hours, and they rather carefully avoided each other during this period. Some emotions needed to be shared, but insane fury was not one of those. Eventually, Sinedra felt she had exhausted the possibilities of her extended outburst, and she settled into the icy calm of one who has been mortally insulted. No matter what face his illiterate note put on the matter, it would be at the very most a week before the entire world knew that Garion had jilted her. The flight of her reluctant bridegroom would become a universal joke. It was absolutely intolerable. She would meet the world, however, with a lifted chin and an imperious gaze. However she might weep and storm and rage in private, the face she presented to the world would betray no hint of how deeply she had been injured. All that was left for her was her pride, and she would never abandon that. The Lady Polgara, however, seemed to feel no need for such imperial reserve. Once her initial fury had subsided to the degree that she allowed her private thunderstorm to pass, a few hardy souls assumed that the worst of it was over. The Earl of Trellheim went to her in an attempt to mollify her. He left her apartment moments later at a run, with her crackling vituperation sizzling in the air about his ears. Barak was pale and shaken when he reported back to the others.
"Don't go near her,"
he advised in a frightened voice.
"Do whatever she says as quickly as you can, and stay absolutely out of her sight."
"Isn't she calming down at all?" King Rodar asked.
"She's finished breaking the furniture,"
Barak replied.
"I think she's getting ready to start on people."
Thereafter, each time Polgara emerged from her apartment, the warning spread instantly, and the halls of Iron Grip's citadel emptied. Barak suggests violence? No. Did he? I don't think this wasn't him advocating for violence. This was him fearing and warning others of impending violence. Yeah. The warning spread instantly, and the halls of Iron Grip Citadel emptied. Her commands, delivered usually by her maid, were all variations of the initial orders she had given King Anheg. They were to find the vagrant trio and bring them back to face her. He did suggest there would be violence. Yeah, that's true. In the days that followed, Princess Sinedra's first rage settled into a sort of peevishness that made people avoid her almost as much as they avoided Polgara. All but gentle Adara, who endured the tiny girl's outbursts with a calm patience. The two of them spent most of their time sitting in the garden adjoining the royal apartments, where Sinedra could give vent to her emotions without fear of being overheard. It was 5 days after Garion and the others had left before Sinedra discovered the full implications of their departure. The day was warm. Spring came eventually even to a bleak place like Riva, and the small bit of lawn in the center of the garden was a lush green. Pink, blue, and flaming red flowers nodded in their beds as bright yellow bees industriously carried kisses from blossom to blossom. Well. Sinedra, however, did not want to think about kisses. Dressed in her favorite pale green dryad tunic, she bit rather savagely at an unoffending lock of hair. We don't have that on this one, do we? Or if we do, it's long since stamped in. I don't think it's on this one. I think that was a previous sheet. At an unoffending lock of hair, and spoke to the patient Adara at length about the inconstancy of men. It was about mid-afternoon when Queen Layla of Sandaria found them there. "Oh, there you are," the plump little queen bubbled at them. As always, her crown was a little awry. "We've been looking all over for you." "Why?" was Sinedra's somewhat ungracious reply. Queen Layla stopped and looked critically at the princess. "My," she said, "aren't we cross today? Just what is your problem, Sinedra? You've barely been civil for days now." Sinedra caught Adara's warning look to the queen, and that irritated her all the more. Her response was chilly. "I'm finding the experience of being jilted to be just a bit annoying, Your Highness," she said. Queen Layla's sunny face hardened. "Would you excuse us, Adara?" she asked. "Of course, Your Highness," Adara replied, rising quickly. "I'll be inside, Sinedra," she said, and went gracefully out of the garden. Queen Layla waited until the girl was out of earshot, then sat down on a marble bench. "Come here, Sinedra," she said firmly. The princess looked at the motherly little woman, a bit startled by the iron in her voice. Obediently, she went to the bench and sat. "You really should stop interpreting everything that happens in the world as a personal insult, you know," Layla told her. "That's a very unbecoming habit. What Garion, Belgarath, and Keldar did has absolutely nothing to do with you." She looked sternly at Sinedra. "Do you know anything at all about the prophecy?" "I've heard about it," Sinedra sulked. "Tolnadrans don't really believe in that sort of thing." "Perhaps that's the problem," Layla said. I guess you can get away with it if you're Queen Layla. Because she's such a dear. I want you to listen very carefully, Sinedra. You may not believe, but you will understand. The queen thought for a moment. The prophecy clearly states that when the Revan king returns, Torak will awaken. Torak? That's nonsense. Torak's dead. Don't interrupt, dear, Layla told her. You traveled with them for all that time, and you still don't understand. For a little girl who seems so bright, you're remarkably dense. Sinedra flushed at that. Torak is a god, Sinedra, Layla continued. He's asleep, not dead. He did not die at Vomimbre, much as some people might like to think he did. The instant that Garion touched the orb, Torak began to stir. Haven't you ever wondered why Polgara insisted that Erend carry the orb back from Rak Kthol? Garion could have carried it just as easily, you know. Sinedra hadn't thought of that. But if Garion had touched it, still on Angarak soil and without his sword, Torak might very well have jumped up and gone after him immediately, and Garion would have been killed. Killed? Sinedra gasped. Of course, dear. That's what this is all about. The prophecy says that Torak and the Revan king will eventually meet, and that in their meeting shall be decided the fate of mankind. Garion! Sinedra exclaimed, stunned and disbelieving. Surely you're not serious? I am serious. I've never been more serious in my life, child, and don't call me Shirley. I had to, I'm sorry. It was necessary. Surely you're not serious. I've never been more serious in my life, child. Garion has to fight Torak, to the death, to decide the fate of the world. Now, do you understand? That's why Belgarath and Keldar and Garion left Riva so suddenly. They're on their way to Meloria so that Garion can fight Torak. He could have taken an army with him, but he knew that would only cause needless deaths. That's why the three of them went alone. Now don't you think it's time that you grew up just a little bit? Sinedra was greatly subdued after her conversation with Queen Layla. For perhaps the first time in her life, she began to think more about someone else than she did about herself. She worried constantly about Garion, and at night she had dreadful nightmares about the hideous things that could happen to him. To make matters worse, there seemed to be a persistent buzzing in her ears that was at times quite maddening. It was rather like the sound of voices coming from a long way off, voices that verged just on the edge of being understandable, but never quite were. The buzzing sound, coupled with her anxiety about Garion, made her moody and frequently short-tempered. Even Adara began to avoid her. The irritating sound in her ears continued for several days before she discovered, quite by accident, the significance of it. The weather on the Isle of the Winds was never really very good, and spring was a particularly unpredictable time of year. A series of storms, following one after another in dreary progression, lashed at the rocky coast, and nasty little rain squalls swept the city and the island. One somber, rainy morning, the princess sat in her chambers looking glumly out the window at the soggy garden. The fire which crackled on her hearth did little to warm her mood. After a while she sighed and, for want of anything better to do, she sat at her dressing table and began to brush her hair. Yeah. The silver flicker at her throat distracted her eye momentarily as she looked at herself in the mirror. It was the medallion Geryon had given her just after her birthday. She had, by now, grown accustomed to its being there, though the fact that she could not take it off still caused her periodic fits of anger. Without actually thinking about it, she stopped brushing and touched the amulet with her fingertips.
But we can't do a thing until the Aurans and the Tolnedrons are fully mobilized.
It was the voice of King Rodar of Drasnia. Sinedra started and turned quickly, wondering why the portly monarch had entered her room. As soon as she removed her fingers from the silver amulet, the voice stopped. Sinedra looked around, puzzled. She frowned and touched the amulet again.
No, no, another voice said. You don't add the spices until after it starts to boil.
Yep. Yep. Sinedra doesn't have Geryon's bad habits, so we had to give it to her with magic for this part of the book. Sinedra again removed her fingertips from the talisman at her throat, and that voice, too, stopped abruptly. Fascinated, she touched it for the third time. You make up the bed, and I'll straighten up. We'll have to hurry. The Queen of Cherok might come back at any minute. Wonderingly, the princess touched the... What do you think was happening in that last part? The princess touched the amulet again and again, and her ears ranged randomly through the citadel.
The fire's too hot. This iron will scorch anything it touches.
Then she heard a snatch of whispered conversation. What if somebody comes? It was a girl's voice. Nobody's going to come. The young man's voice, which replied, had a peculiar wheedling quality. We're all safe and cozy here, and I really do love you. Sinedra quickly jerked her fingers from the amulet, blushing furiously. At first, there was no direction to it, but as the princess experimented, she gradually learned to focus this peculiar phenomenon. After a couple of hours of intense concentration, she found that she could skim rapidly through all the talking that was going on in a given quarter of the citadel until she found a conversation that interested her. In the process, she learned many secrets, some very interesting, and some not very nice. She knew that she should feel guilty about her surreptitious eavesdropping, but for some reason she did not. She's unknowingly picked up the bad habit of her betrothed. I don't think she knows about that particular detail about Geryon yet. Yes, they do. I am fairly certain Belgarath actually mentioned cryptically this particular power of the amulet. They can share a hobby. Thy reasoning is sound, your majesty. It was Mandaralan's voice.
King Corodulin is committed to the cause, though it will take some weeks for his call to arms to gather the forces of Orindia. Our major concern must be the position the Emperor will take in the affair. Without the legions, our situation is perilous. Ranbaroon has no choice in the matter, King Anheg declared. He's bound by the provisions of the Accords of Vomimbre.
Brand, the Raven Warder, cleared his throat. I don't think it's that simple, Your Majesty, he said quietly in his deep voice. I guess I've got to deepen it a little bit. The Accords state that the kingdoms of the West must respond to a call from the Raven King, and Belgarian is not here to issue that call. We're acting in his behalf, King Chohag asserted.
The problem lies in convincing Ranbaroon of that, Rodar pointed out. I know the Tolnedrans. They'll have whole battalions of legal experts working on the Accords. Unless Belgarian himself meets Ranbaroon face to face and issues his command in person, the Emperor will take the position that he's not legally bound to join us. The Raven King is the only one who can issue a call to war.
Sinedra let her fingertips drop from the amulet at her throat. An idea was beginning to take shape in her mind. It was an exciting idea, but she was not at all certain that she could bring it off. Alorns, she knew, were stubborn and reluctant to accept any new ideas. She quickly laid aside her hairbrush and went to a small chest standing against the wall near the window. She opened the chest and began rummaging through it. After a moment, she found the tightly rolled parchment she had been seeking. She unrolled it and read through it quickly until she found the passage she wanted. She read it carefully several times. It seemed to say what she wanted it to say. It's an interesting phrasing. What she wanted it to say. She considered the idea throughout the rest of the day. The possibility that anyone might succeed in catching up with Garion and stopping him was remote, to say the very least. Belgarath and Prince Keldar were too skilled at evasion to allow themselves to be easily caught. Chasing them was simply a waste of time. Since Polgara was not yet rational enough to see things in this light, it fell to Sinedra to take immediate steps to minimize Garion's danger once he had entered the lands of the Angarax. All she had to do now was convince the Alorn kings that she was the logical one to take those steps. Let's find out if it is an awful idea. Historically, many of Sinedra's ideas are, at the very least, selfish. Let's see if this follows that trend, shall we? It was still raining the next morning, and she rose early to make her preparations. She must, of course, look positively regal. Her choice of an emerald velvet gown and matching cape was artful. She knew that she was stunning in green, and her circlet of gold oak leaves was enough like a crown to convey the right suggestion. She was glad she had waited until morning. Men were easier to deal with in the morning, she had discovered. They would fight her at first, and she wanted the idea implanted in their minds before they were fully awake. As she gave herself a last-minute check in the tall mirror in her dressing room, she gathered her determination and marshaled all her arguments. The slightest objection must be met instantly. Carefully, she put herself in an imperial frame of mind, and, taking the rolled parchment, she moved toward the door. The council chamber in which the Alorn kings usually gathered was a large room high up in one of the massive towers of the citadel. Seems not very thoughtful for Chohag and somewhat to King Rodar. There were heavy beams on the ceiling, a deep maroon carpet on the floor, and a fireplace at the far end big enough to stand in, although you shouldn't do that. Maroon drapes flanked the windows where tatters of rain slashed across the solid stones of the tower. The walls of the chamber were covered with maps. We've got a room like that. And the large table was littered with parchments and ale cups. King Anheg, in his blue robe and dented crown, sprawled in the nearest chair, as shaggy and brutish-looking as always. King Rodar was vast in his crimson mantle, but the other kings and generals wore rather plain clothing. Sinedra entered the chamber without knocking, and stared regally at the somewhat confused men who struggled to their feet in acknowledgment of her presence.
Your Highness, King Rodar began with a portly bow, you honor us. Was there...
Your Majesty, she responded with a little curtsy, and gentlemen, I find that I need your advice in a matter of state.
We are all at your immediate disposal, Your Highness, King Rodar replied, with a sly little twinkle in his eyes.
In the absence of King Belgarian, it appears that I must act in his stead, Sinedra announced, and I need your advice on how to proceed. I wish the transfer of power into my hands to go as smoothly as possible. They all stared at her in disbelief. They all stared at her disbelievingly. King Rodar recovered his wits first.
An interesting proposal, Your Highness, he murmured politely. We have, however, made other arrangements. There's a long-standing precedent in the matter. We thank Your Highness for her gracious offer nonetheless.
It was not precisely an offer, Your Majesty, Sinedra told him, and any previous precedents have been superseded. King Anheg was spluttering, but Rodar was already moving along smoothly. Sinedra realized that the rotund Drasnian king was likely to be her most serious adversary, or her most effective ally.
We'd all be fascinated to examine the instrument vesting Your Highness with royal authority, he said. I presume that the parchment you carry is relevant?
It is indeed, Your Majesty, Sinedra declared. The document quite clearly lists my responsibilities.
May I?
Rodar asked, extending his hand. Sinedra handed him the parchment, and he carefully unrolled it.
Your Highness, this is your betrothal agreement. Perhaps you meant to bring a different document.
The pertinent material is contained in the 4th paragraph, Your Majesty. Rodar quickly read the paragraph, frowning slightly.
What does it say, Rodar?
King Anheg asked impatiently.
Interesting,
Rodar murmured, scratching his ear.
Rodar,
Anheg complained.
What does it say?
King Rodar cleared his throat and began to read aloud.
It is agreed that King Belgarian and his queen shall rule jointly, and that in his absence shall she assume fully the duties and authority of the Revan throne. Let me see that, Anheg demanded, snatching the parchment from Rodar. It doesn't mean anything, Brand declared. She isn't his queen yet. She won't be until after the wedding. That's only a formality, my Lord Warder, Sinedra told him. A rather important one, I'd say, he retorted. The precedent is well established, she said coolly. When a king dies, the next in line assumes the duties of the crown, doesn't he, even though there hasn't been a formal coronation? That's different, Brand growled. I fail to see the difference, my lord. I have been designated Belgarian's co-ruler. In his absence or an emergency, I am obliged to take command. It is my right and my responsibility. The formalities may have to wait, but I am the Revan Queen. This is King Belgarian's will and intent. Will you defy your king? There's something to what she says, my Lord Warder, the Earl of Selene mused. The document is quite clear. But look at this, Anheg said triumphantly. In paragraph 2, it says that should the wedding not take place, all gifts are to be returned. I love that that's in there. I couldn't even finish his lines with a straight face. What a grasping at straws. That was a very expensive pots and pans set we got you. If you're not getting married. I've got a nephew who could use them. Oh boy. In paragraph... I can't. In paragraph 2, it says that should the wedding not take place, all gifts are to be returned. The wedding has not taken place. I'm not sure that power is a gift, Anheg, King Fulrak suggested. You can't give it and then take it back. There's no way she could rule, Anheg declared stubbornly. She doesn't know the first thing about Alorns. Excuse me. Neither did Garion, King Chohag murmured in his quiet voice. She can learn the same way he did. Sinedra had been rather carefully assessing their mood. Most of them seemed willing to at least consider her idea. Only the two conservatives, Brand and Anheg, were actually resisting. It seemed the time now for a dignified withdrawal, coupled with a disarming offer. Oh, hi, puppy. You want a snack? You like the crunch? All right, where were we? Something about an offer. It seemed the time now for a dignified withdrawal, coupled with a disarming offer. I will leave you, gentlemen, to discuss the matter, she declared somewhat loftily. I would like you to know, however, that I realize the gravity of the situation confronting the West. She deliberately put on a winsome little girl face. I'm only a young girl, she confessed, unused to the intricacies of strategy and tactics. I could never make any decisions in that area without the fullest advice from you, gentlemen. Right.
That's a good point from the Sharkies. I mean, they weren't really talking about Garion until um, Chohag brought it up in that respect. But that's, yeah, I mean, she theoretically has been training for this sort of thing. Maybe not for like, full rulership necessarily. She's probably more so been trained for, like, state functions and the like. But, there's an interesting thing here where she goes, where it says, it seemed now that the time now for a dignified withdrawal coupled with a disarming offer. It's her tactic of coming in, presenting this situation, and then not just arguing and arguing and arguing until she's decided she's won or everyone's, agreed that she's won, or until she's lost, but her coming in and presenting the argument, shooting down a couple of opposing arguments, and then leaving is interesting. I don't know if I would be very good at that part. I think I would want to dig my heels in and keep arguing. She curtsied then to King Rodar, choosing him deliberately. Your Majesty, she said, I shall await your decision. He bowed in response, a bit floridly. Your Majesty, he replied with a sly wink. Sinedra retired and literally... This is the second time in, like, a few chapters that the word literally has been used not precisely accurately. Sinedra retired and literally flew down the corridors to her own quarters. Breathlessly, she closed the door behind her and touched the talisman at her throat with trembling fingertips. She sorted quickly through random conversation until she found the one she wanted. Yeah, I guess so.
Refuse to be a party to an absurdity,
Anheg was saying.
Anheg, my friend,
King Fulrak of Sandaria said with surprising firmness.
You are my dear brother king, but you do have a few blind spots. Wouldn't it be more statesmanlike to consider the advantages and disadvantages of the situation dispassionately? The Alorns will never follow her,
Anheg declared.
That's a major disadvantage right there.
The Alorns will follow us, though, King Chohag said quietly. She's only going to be a figurehead after all, a symbol of unity. I suspect that Chohag's hit the exact point we should examine most closely, King Rodar urged. My apologies, Baron Mandaralan, but the Arrens are totally disunited. Astoria and Mimbre are hovering on the verge of reopening hostilities, and a call from King Corodulan could very possibly be ignored in northern Orendia, in which case the Mimbrate Knights would almost be compelled to stay home to defend against possible Astorian uprisings. We have to have someone who can make them forget their squabbles and join with us. We need the Astorian bowmen and the Mimbrate Knights. I must sadly concur, Your Majesty, Mandaralan agreed. My poor Orendia must needs be united in one cause from the outside. We are not wise enough to unify ourselves.
Sinedra can serve us there as well as Garion could have done,
Barak reasoned.
I don't think anybody expected him to be a general. All we were going to do was put a crown on him and let him ride at the head of the army. And Arrens get all gushy and romantic about pretty girls. That betrothal document makes her claim at least semi-legitimate. All we'd have to do is act as if we accepted her and talk very fast. Add the prospect of a nice little war someplace, and the errands will unite behind us, I think.
Close to suggesting violence, but too brief and too non-specific, I think.
The main point to consider, though, King Rodar emphasized, is the impact she's going to have in Tolnedra. Ranbaroon dotes on her, and he might agree to lend her his legions, at least some of them, which he'd never do if we were the ones asking it of him. He'll see the political advantage of having her in command almost immediately. We need those legions. I personally don't like Tolnedrans, but the legions are the finest fighting force in the world. I'll bend my knee to Sinedra if I have to in order to get them. Let her play queen if she wants to.
Sinedra smiled. Things were going even better than she had expected. All in all, she was quite pleased with herself as she sat down at her dressing table and began to brush her hair, humming softly all the while. Yeah. Of course she was. And that's the end of chapter 22. Felt like a little bit of a bigger one. It's 8:30, so I think that's probably good for tonight. Oh. So that was interesting. I feel like that gives us a little preview of how this part might play out a little bit. That was a full chapter. So we are definitely back to Sinedra's point of view. One of the best described angry temper tantrums you've ever read. Yeah. Yeah, that was... It was interesting in that it was full-scale destruction. She was raining thunderbolts down on the entire island, but it was still definitely a temper tantrum. Especially like the teacups. Blam! And also both of them handing off the crystal wren. Well, I guess Sinedra protecting it, and then Sinedra handing it off to go somewhere safe, while she goes off to do her own destruction. Possibly cursing so high-pitched only dogs can hear. You have to also wonder about being Sinedra in that situation. Must have been at least a little bit unsatisfying, right? You just saw like the most intense temper tantrum known to mankind, like in the history of the world, except for maybe when the Orb of Aldur cracked the world open. And then you have to go off and follow that up with your own temper tantrum, except without all of the magical destruction. Like, I don't know. Imagine one day just discovering that Jedi are real and there's lots of people in the world that are Force sensitive and can manipulate things with the Force, and you're not one of them. That would be so disappointing. It was also interesting that we got such a, like, full description of Polgara's reaction, and then much less of a description of Sinedra's. Imagine it just getting screechier and screechier. You know, cursing in dozens of languages and emphasizing every curse with an explosion. The sky outside going from a bright spring day to the clouding over and then the deluge of rain and then hail. Yeah, that was a very good part of that chapter. Curses that literally became physical fly around the room a bit. Oh boy. Yeah, sometimes you really gotta just fully describe something like that. Just really, really get into it. Mm-hmm. All right, well, that was fun. We have begun the Sinedra part of the book. Multiple descriptions of all the yeah. Queen Layla fleeing, King Anheg peeking in and then fleeing, and then getting summoned in and then fleeing again. Barak going in and then fleeing. Oh boy. The only one that didn't flee was Sinedra, and that was because she more sort of just joined in separately. Joined in separately. Yeah. Queen Layla was an interesting choice to explain the prophecy to, oh yeah, to Sinedra, in that I wouldn't have really expected Queen Layla to be the most versed on the prophecy. I suppose probably all of Alorn royalty is to at least some extent. But also, like, she said, like, the prophecy clearly states that Torak and the Revan King must fight each other. But that's not really the case. There's this thing, you ever notice in shows sometimes where there'll be like a top secret piece of information that isn't unveiled. It's like something you're left questioning the whole time, right? You're like, one of the things that's holding your attention is what is X, right? There's a secret X in the show. What is it? What could it be? And then finally, the main character learns about X and gets it explained. This is X, blah, 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 right? This is what it all is. It was me the whole time, whatever. And then from that point on, it's like absolutely every single person in the world knows that and has always known that. Where it's like it was a plot secret, and then the moment it was no longer a plot secret, just everybody kind of widely knows it. I always find that sort of thing very dissatisfying, and this felt like a small piece of that. Like, in the prophecy, it was like the child, like it was hidden in a rather obscure piece of prophecy in the Marin Codex, which is widely discredited, apparently, right? Because it was written by a madman and whatever. That the child of light and the child of darkness must meet. I mean, I guess there was the whole thing. Wasn't there something somewhere about the return of the Revan King? Like, Torak is defeated until then, but nobody really believed in it. But the part about them having to fight, I feel like was actually mostly pretty obscure, right? Like, the prophecy itself took Garion down into like the libraries and showed him the Marin Codex and got him to unfold it until this one part: the child of light and the child of darkness must meet. That means that you and Torak have to fight because you're the child of light and Torak's always been the child of darkness. And now Queen Layla's here, like, Garion's gone off to fight Torak, and maybe Polgara explained it to her. That's my best reasoning for that scene, is that ahead of time, Queen Layla spoke to Polgara at some point. Why did they run away? And Polgara explained, Garion's got to go fight Torak. Something like that. I suppose. Still seemed a little odd to me. Like, I mean, Queen Layla talking Sinedra down a little bit makes sense. But Queen Layla explaining the prophecy made less sense to me. Especially for Millennia. Yeah, that's fair. Alright, well, it's 20 to 9. I don't see anybody. I don't know what's happened. It used to be that around this time, a lot of people, like on when I was wrapping up my stream, I'd frequently usually have at least one person to raid out to. But I think Slightly Stupid Bear has changed his schedule because I think his work schedule changed. So he's not usually going at this time, and I suppose that was the primary one I would raid to. Well, anyways, have a lovely rest of your evening and rest of your week. I should be back here on Friday, barring any interruptions from house showings or anything like that. And then, yeah, we'll read some more about what Sinedra is up to. So have a good night, everyone. Hopefully I'll see you on Friday. Bye.